There was a girl 16 or 17 who felt she saw angels giving her the special message of God. Whether they would do it or not, we cannot comment on that. But that teenager was so confident and firm in her claim that she got ready to die alive of fire. She lived only 19 years. But the last 3 years of her life are such which are a matter of pride for France till today. There are still statues of her all over France. Why is this little girl so well known in history? That centuries have passed, but people have not forgotten her. I am Zod Abaid, and in the History Speak series, I will show you the story of the same girl, Joan of Arc. In 1420, half of France was occupied by England. The map showed across the Loire River in the north, England's army occupying French territories, and down the river, the weak French Empire was tottering in the south. Between the two parts, this was the only river that carried the burden of French independence on its weak banks. Paris, the great city of France, was also in the northern part and was occupied by England. Not only this, but there was also no one to lead France, because the king had recently died and the future king, Charles VII, had yet to be crowned and sworn in. According to the traditions of the time, the king had to go to Reims in northern France to take the oath, where the coronation rituals were performed. This practice has been going on for ages, but now apparently the British army was occupying the northern side. Therefore, the new king, Charles VII, stayed in the city of Chinon near the Loire River. But it was also a fact that many French were confused about who their real king was, because under a controversial treaty, King Henry of England had also declared himself King of France. That is, now the fate of France. The future of the French was looking bleak. The King of England had declared war on the whole of France, and was ready at any time to cross the river and raise the English flag over the rest of France. It could have happened at any time, but in the middle was the Loire River and, more importantly, Orléans, the city on its banks. The British army could not capture it despite its best efforts. Although it was on the northern side on the banks of the river and surrounded by the English army, its citizens showed unsurpassed bravery and refused to surrender. During the 6-month siege, they were in bad condition due to hunger, while they did not have many weapons. But the citizens here were vigorously and were not ready to give up. But despite that, they were not victorious either. So the war had halted reaching the city, and there was a stalemate. However, the French were more worried than England because their independence was at stake, not that of the British. It was a situation in which there was despair all over. Only a miracle could counter this despair. That is, something out of the box which is unthinkable by anyone at that time. It happened that the place where the king was, about 500 kilometers from here village in northern France, was attacked by the British army and its allies. There, a young girl, Joan, ran away with her parents before the attack. Many people in his village were killed, and she had also left her child at home. The loss of French independence and then a bloody attack on her village were things that were deeply ingrained in his young, sensitive mind. Not long after, at the age of 13, she began to hear some voices around her. She felt the holy persons and angels called and talked to her. The angels would tell her good things and instruct her to stay close to Jesus. She would find peace in the church. But gradually her talks with the angels crossed religion over to the political realm. Many people in Europe at that time, especially women, would claim that they saw holy figures who talked to them, or that they saw so-and-so in a dream who advised her to do this or that. This was not unusual or new for the time, but it became unusual when the strangeness set in when she began to say that the holy ones had commanded them to place Charles VII, the crown prince of France, on the throne. It was the same Charles VII who stayed in Chinon. This was a hope in the desperate atmosphere of France. No one expected such a big deal from a 15, 16-year-old girl. So with such things, she became famous. Joan, who was popular by the English version of her name, Joan of Arc, became a mini-celebrity in her area. She believed in her heart that the angels were telling her about the future king of France. That is why she wrote many times to Charles VII to invite her to a meeting. That she had something very important to share with you. Charles VII and his associates did not take her letters seriously, but pessimism was growing about the future of France. So much so the tiniest bit of hope seemed to them a big support. Therefore, any time in this desperate time, he decided to call Joan of Arc. However, inviting a teenage girl like Joan to the royal abode was not agreed upon by all. Those close to the royal family included several people who believed Joan of Arc was a witch. They allowed the visit of Joan of Arc on the condition that Charles VII would play a trick. That is, he would put someone else on the throne and stand among the common people. The would-be King Charles be safe from any magic of Joan if she happened to be a witch. If she was truly a holy being, she would know the king standing here and not there, hence her actuality would be exposed. Thus Charles VII would be safe, and the girl's mystery would be revealed as to her motive of visiting here. On this condition, when Joan got the order to attend the court, his fame reached outside her native region Domremy to the occupied France and Chinon. People argued that a young girl was being told by angels about the victory of France, and that she was going to Charles VII with a secret divine message. So when Joan of Arc entered Charles's residence, the scene was spectacular. A nervous mock king sat on the throne, trying to hide his panic. Joan looked at the throne and said, "That's a fine young man that sits upon it, but where is Charles VII?" When she was not answered, she looked around the court. Looking at everyone carefully, she then went to a man, bowed down, and paid him courtesy. That was Charles VII. Joan got through her first test by identifying him. She told Charles that God sent to reach out to you to save France from the enemies and bring it back to the divine folds. That God has ordered her to bring Charles VII to the historic city of Reims and crown him King of France. Charles VII was quite impressed with Joan during all of this. Therefore, he asked Joan what should he do now. Joan asked for a horse, armor, some weapons, and soldiers to liberate the besieged city of Orléans on the banks of the Loire River. The king gave them all to her. Now that the siege around Orléans was broken, the passage across the river was open to France, and they could go to the city of Reims and crown the king. It was a great hope, and Joan of Arc was the ray of hope on which the Franciscans now tied their strings. The incident of his recognition at the court of Charles VII has been much quoted in history, but there is no royal record of the residence of Charles VIII. But this incident is a grapevine by the fans of Joan of Arc as her miracle. The writers have also followed this trend. Some historians, however, believe that Charles VII, for the sake of bolstering his claim to the throne, and to mute his rivals in the court, had already arranged this, that Joan of Arc will identify him. To that end, a secret meeting was also held between them and laymen, and the courtiers were kept in the dark about it. So these two versions are before you. Whatever the truth is, the fact was the 17-year-old Joan of Arc's efforts to liberate Orléans were the prime hope of the French. She also had a small force with her. She held in her hands a flag designed by herself. The flag bore the images of angels and the names of Jesus and Mary. She held a sword, and a legend goes it was recovered from the basement of a church on Divine Pointation. In April 1429, Joan of Arc arrived near Orléans at a time when the English had been under siege for 7 months. The 100-year war between the English and the French was on hold in this city. The British, after conquering the city, were unable to advance, while the Orléans citizens failed to break their siege. When Joan of Arc arrived there with a small army, the balance of power shifted in favor of the French. There was a water ditch on 3 sides of the city and a river on the 4th side. The battle was going on at the river bridge. Joan of Arc, with a few horsemen, distracted the English army by attacking on 2 different sides, and then entered the city through the middle route, as you can see on the map. Reaching here, her army did an incredible job. That is, the river bridge, the only way to enter the city and the expected supply line, was blown up. Now, the British army could not even continue the fight, so it had to sit outside the siege. The next morning, the English army saw Joan of Arc on the wall of the castle of Orléans, watching them. It was a huge game-changer for the British commander. Before arriving, Jan, through a message to the English commander, had asked for ending the siege, but instead of replying, the British commander detained the messenger. Now, Joan wrote another letter saying that if the British army repatriated her messenger, she would also release some British prisoners in return. But instead of returning the messenger, the British hurled abuses facing the fort. They replied to the message that, Go and graze the animals in the fields. This warfare is not something for women. The British would look at her and laugh. But the next day, when Joan of Arc came out of the castle and attacked the command tower of the English, and those who were giggling the last day were at 6s and 7s today, a cannonball hit the same commander in the face who until yesterday jeered at her, saying, "Go and graze animals in the fields. War is not your game ball." The death of the commander discouraged the English army, and it fled, leaving the most important city of Orléans. This was a major victory for France at the time, as it had ended the months-long stalemate and tilted the balance of the war in France's favor. But this war also included blood that was of Joan of Arc. An arrow from the British tower hit her armor and penetrated 6 inches into his shoulder. The wound was deep, so much that did not seem to heal up early. Interestingly, before the attack on the British, Joan had told her companions that she would be injured in the battle. The history writes that she recovered soon from this deep wound due to her willpower. Some say that her armor, that is here ironclad, was so strong that the arrow did not go very deep, but her admirers termed her early recovery and the conquest of Orleans as yet another miracle, and it made her a rock star in France. The way was now open to the coronation of Charles VII of France. And this way was open thanks to Joan of Arc. This course was open, but avenues for Joan started to close. How it came? After a glorious victory over the British in the French city of Orleans, in Reims on July 17, 1429, Charles VII was crowned. During the ceremony, Joan of Arc stood next to the king holding the standard with images of angels. It was a big moment for France. It saw regaining its independence. And it was a time when Joan of Arc's prophecies seemed to be fulfilled. The first sign of it was that King Charles VII gave 2 prizes to Joan of Arc. One, that her village tax was waived. Second, her family was accorded prestigious high status like the elite class. But when she asked for an army to liberate Paris, the most important city of France, from the British, the king refused. At that time, Charles the King of France had also taken the oath, and Henry VI, the King of England, had also declared himself the king of both France and England. Now Joan of Arc, an 18-19-year-old victorious, holy girl, wanted to liberate Paris by war. But the French King Charles had made some other plan. He was more interested in liberating the city through negotiations, because the eastern part of France was occupied by the Burgundian tribes. They were French historically and geographically, but had joined England at this point in the war. Charles VII was in negotiations with the Burgundians, and it was going to end up some give and take. So he did not want to go to war during these negotiations. But he could not tell this to Joan of Arc and her fans. So he committed a historical fraud on Joan of Arc. What was this deception? Click here to find out. See here the greatest example of modern leadership, the super hit biography of Abraham Lincoln. And here know how Russia is such a powerful country?